mean, the SPAC was supposed to be just a SPAC. What we realized was there was a hell of a lot of companies that have no place in the public markets whatsoever.
Boom. Okay. Live from the New York mansion here, Nader. This is wonderful.
Exactly.
I love this.
All the square footage you ever dream of.
Okay, so what's the difference rent-wise, going from Houston to New York? What are we talking?
It's actually this. So the cost of living in New York. It's an interesting thought piece here. Everyone always says it's expensive and everything's so pricey and complaining and venting. It's actually not that much more expensive. You just get a lot less. I play tennis over here for the same amount that you'd pay in Houston to get 40 courts that are readily available at pretty much any time of the day. Here you get maybe 3 courts, but it roughly costs the same on a monthly basis either to play tennis in New York City. It's just you get much less bang for your buck, and obviously on the real estate side too. But your cost is, because the reality is you probably wouldn't live in a 1,000 square foot place if you were in Houston, or 1,500 square foot place if you're in Houston.
Yeah, you just spend more.
You'd spend more, but you get more.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how I rationalize it internally to make myself feel better at nights.
It's look, the rent's a little steeper than Oklahoma City, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. You get a lot. Yeah, a great bang for buck value there.
Okay, so you missed Nate this year, which is I find that a little disheartening.
Yeah,
you're a real energy transition guy now. So, did you have any FOMO at all on missing Nate, or are you at a stage where it doesn't matter?
No, I'd love to. More V&E ties, the better. I know. I give respect to the.
There's no tie this year, by the way. There was no. We don't want to make the sponsor, but there was a belt situation. They gave away belts. Unfortunately, I waited too long. All the belts were gone, which is like first time I've seen the souvenir disappear. Before the end of the party.
You stayed at the K&E party too long, probably.
No, that was after. They did the standard. V&E first, mild overlap with the Kirkland party. And the Kirkland party had cowboy hats this year. That's what they had.
That is pretty nice. Well, I did miss.
Had last year.
I did miss Nape. I did make it out last year, but we're in the middle of getting our deal closed. So it's been we've got to keep the priorities straight, Raj. We can't do everything in life. We're a team of 2 at SGen, so we we don't have the benefits of an admin or a executive assistant to help with planning my NAPE schedule, unfortunately.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you are partially subsidizing. You and your various sponsors. You're partially subsidizing these NAPE parties for me to attend, where I generate no fees anyway. So it is what it is.
That's true. Yeah, all those vendors will be very happy come March when we close SGen. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Well, you definitely moved on to the energy transition side now. So, okay, let's get into it a little bit story-wise. You grew up in Houston. The only time you were out of Houston is you went to school in California, where it sounds like you have a lot of family, and came back, started investment banking. Sounds like oil and gas focus, sort of in that early shale era. And then you hopped on to sort of be on the private equity side, and then moved on to the Portco side. And let's walk through that. So that was a big shift change. Was there a goal where you wanted to do that, or was it, like if you look back on it, you wanted to stay on the private equity side? What was the thought?
Yeah, it's a piece that I think about, more often than I probably should to be healthy, but. I was at Morgan Stanley. It wasn't just oil and gas. It was technically, there was some renewables that was getting done, right, with the Global Power and Utilities Group with GPUC.
This is 2012,
2010, 2011, or 2010 to 2012 was my time there. But there was collaboration with the power side. There was collaboration with infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So I'd say. But I mean, all the the hype and the craze was oil and gas, right? That was the beginning of the shale renaissance, and the Bakken shale had just been. Yeah, I think it was who was it? Brigham had just released some high IPs, and then everyone started to begin a land grab, in the Williston Basin, and Statoil came in and bought everybody out, and it was the beginning of that. So yeah, I spent a lot of my time on the upstream side, but it was a lot of midstream as well and a lot of power. And then, the way I thought about, staying in private equity versus, going the operating route was really at the time what I noticed, at least in the upstream space, which is where I was spending most of my time post banking, was, a lot of the sponsors were chasing the same deals. And everyone was really bidding on the same packages, name your Jeffries package, or looking for the same acreage, utilizing the same broker that your landman had access to. So I was like, well, where do you have a better competitive advantage to actually generate outsized returns? Is it going to be at the sponsor side, or is it going to be at the operator side? So that I was thinking, if you can just kind of situate yourself with a high quality team, management team, you should technically have better odds to generate outsized returns. Even if it's, even if it's a 1% advantage in the long run, you're better off being, at an operating crow that's effectively commoditized business, right? It's not a technology business where you're forming one idea that has a binary outcome. So that was really the trigger, was to kind of get out. And also, there was a lot of my peers were going down the PE route. No disrespect to them, but it was a very similar language that they all spoke, and it was a very conventional path that I just said, said there could be a lot of ways to make more money here at the operating route. So that was the impetus, and then joined Ursa Resources after their first exit, which was a denim-backed company, and was with that team for probably 8 or 9 years, with through Ursa and through Bruin, and ultimately sold the business to Enerplus. So it was a long run. Built both companies from the ground up. It was 5 or 6 of us to start. We ended up, at the peak, probably close to 100 employees, 3 or 4 different field offices, deployed $1 billion plus of capital, outgrew our private equity sponsors. We had a bunch of fun Kuwaiti and Chinese interest, members on our board, and it was, it was a large private company that, in a normal industry where there was demand for what we did, we would have been a public company, right? We just happened to be in this unusual melting ice cube oil and gas industry where no one knows what to do with you, and we are where we are.
Well, so it's kind of fascinating to think about. Your view was, I'll generate a better set of returns going on the management team side, which is true. Like if you sort of knock it out of the park from a management team or founder perspective, you can retire off of that. The inverse of that is your floor is way lower, right? Which is like the average management team does not have that same set of odds. Whereas the average fund, the returns are going to be better because you have a big portfolio that's diversified, right?
No, totally. That's why I was saying, if you can align yourself with that, with the teams that actually can deliver, then I think you're better off, right? It's like, if you can get into that community, then you should be better off. And if you have enough shots on goals, it'll work.
The tough part is, we've seen it where there's a series of management teams that have generated a bunch of returns, knocked out of the park, and there's a certain iteration where they just get completely smoked. Yeah. And you can sort of like dissect why that is, whether that's like, generally speaking, it's some like over leverage issue, right? Like we over levered it, we drilled it too much, commodity prices collapse, there's no liquidity, we gotta restructure this whole deal. The assets don't go anywhere, but the equity got smoked. The equity got smoked. So in some ways, I think, do you still think that's true? Like, do you still think?
No, because you can't lever these assets up anymore.
Yeah,
that's the difference. These assets are priced to be owned for the long term now, I think. And I don't know, I haven't really been following as much, the equivalent of the next Tuscaloosa Marine Shale play. I don't know if there is one.
It's called the Tuscaloosa Marine Shale. It's called TMS now.
There you go.
We don't need to say the whole name. You just say TMS.
Yeah, TMS. I don't know if people still, use that acronym. It's been a while. But they, these assets are priced now, I think, where there is limited debt capacity. There's limited capital that wants to enter the debt stack, which is where, groups like, that provide kind of more special sitch capital are being very successful. And we all know who those are, but folks that are kind of playing in that credit angle that can offer unitranche and effectively RBL replacement capital, they've done remarkably well. their name starts with a Q.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. It's funny you mentioned TMS. I remember some PE interviews in like, man, it must have been 2014. I think Apollo had done some TMS Drillco, if you recall. I think it was with
That's true.
was it with Goodrich? It was with somebody.
I think it was with Goodrich.
And like another fund was like, hey, like break this down. Would you recommend us doing this deal or not? And I remember like I spent, like a countless number of nights putting together a model and this and that. And I think my like response was like, yeah, let's do it. Generally speaking, that is my personality, right? Like, okay, let's do it. Like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen here? We got downside cap, which like I think, the fund will remain nameless. My suspicion is they were like, yo, this guy is not meant to be at the fund level. I think the response then was like, let me put you in touch with a couple of our portcos, though, because we think your personality is going to be better suited there.
Yeah, the let's do it personality.
The let's do it personality is the portco personality, right? And then the fund managers is sort of a game of whack-a-mole to knock it down. Okay, that's like that. That's where we're at. Okay, so let's talk. Bruin obviously sort of exits in 2021.
Yep.
At sort of, in some ways, like some version of the bottom of the cycle from an exit perspective.
It was the beginning of what we are in the cycle, Raj. You got to get it right. We at least, crude was probably inching towards 60, which at the time was, I guess you can call it the bottom of the cycle. But it was at least it was it was beginning its upward trajectory.
Right. So Enerplus takes it down. Correct. That was a fairly insider process post restructuring, right?
Yeah. We did hire banks. We had two banks that are running the process. We had RBC and JP Morgan.
BMO, I think I forget who. But okay, so that asset goes out. You're free and clear from Bruin. What happens next?
Yeah, so we sold Bruin. I was in the upstream game for 7 or 8 years, or longer, 8 or 9 years, and I tend to forget 2020. For me, it was where I want to spend my time. It was a good exit for the management team, and it was really kind of how do I want to spend my time, for the longevity of my career, right? And where I was thinking about was, where is the velocity of capital going? Where is the velocity of IQ going? And is there a place where I can situate my skill set, right, and reposition that with a related sector to that has growth, right? I think for me it was what sector has growth where you have a product that could scale easily, or at least if not easily, you could align yourself with a team to be able to scale it in a way where you could truly generate highly outsized returns, right? So oil and gas is great. I think it's just it's a commodity business that's growing at GDP roughly, right? So it's the growth had occurred in the U.S. and the reality is it's still occurring, right? Everyone keeps saying we've hit peak production, but every year we're still growing by 500,000 barrels a day. Gas is
You're just not growing at the CAGRs that we were used to seeing in the heyday, right? Where
that's right.
And that's what that's where the money flows, and that's where you have a piece of building a business, right? Like it's much easier to build something in theory where you have a tailwind, right? Like I'm building something in a market that's just growing 8 or 10% year over year. In theory, no matter what we do, this should compound some return.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, for me, it was, my background's in finance, right? So I need to align myself where I need to be close to the capital, right? Ultimately, to be able to be in a position to do something, right? And what I saw in speaking, I probably took 4 or 5 months off, spoke to a lot of investors, kind of mid-sized investors, large cap investors, VC investors that introduced, the whole theme of climate tech. Mm-hmm. And, no one was really chasing oil and gas, not because they didn't want to. At that point, there was a lot of fatigue, both on the investor side and on me personally. But it was just, I think people wanted something different. There was so much capital destruction that there was still kind of the early days of capital discipline, right, from upstream and midstream coast. So people were looking for something different. And the reality is the world was changing, right, under all of our feet. I mean, the world was changing and it has changed today. So I just said, hey, let's give this a shot. It was the mentality that you had in the TMS. Why not? Let's just do it. So I ended up partnering with a former colleague of mine who I worked with back at Morgan Stanley. and we, when SGEM was formed, it was probably May 2021, started drafting the S1, did our IPO, industrial decarbonization SPAC, which was the theme of the 2021, I guess, for a lot of energy transition funds or energy funds turning into energy transition funds. So we launched SGen in the fall of 2021.
Was the SPAC the original concept of getting in, or was it sort of a twofold, hey, we'll look at stuff on the growth equity side plus SPAC, or how did you think about that difference?
So at that moment, if you recall, there really wasn't much private equity entering, I'd say, energy transition.
No,
It was all venture, highly saturated. You saw all these new, I think it was Chris Sacca that raised lower carbon overnight, right, with kind of the California fires in the background.
3 days or whatever it was.
Yeah, raised 800 million with 15 phone calls. So it was that part of the cycle, right? So there really wasn't much private equity. If anything, there was maybe sprinkles of growth equity. But no, I mean, the SPAC was supposed to be just a SPAC. What we realized was there was a hell of a lot of companies that have no place in the public markets whatsoever.
But the public markets didn't think that at that moment, right? At that moment,
there was a disconnect.
The entire ecosystem thought these companies should be public companies. It's okay.
Well, think about it. I mean, the average SPAC had 300 million, probably 200 million in trust, and the average redemptions on those D-SPACs was probably 15%, 20%.
Yeah, which is nuts.
It was the cheapest and most efficient way to raise $200 million for a PowerPoint presentation business plan.
Yeah.
And
now 99% of those companies are effectively zombie codes, right? Because they're worth less than what they've raised.
Yeah, they're worth less than what they've raised, and they never should have gone public in the first place. And they are where they are. I think what we told our investors on the roadshow was we're going to bring a profitable company that's not a flying taxi, it's not a science project, that's a business that's easy to understand, that you can model on a piece of a napkin. And it turns out that's very tough, right? To find a LTM EBITDA generating business in energy transition that the public could actually understand. So that's what we told our investors, and we spent the entirety of 2022. We met with 400 companies across grid storage, across low carbon fuels, across circular economy, energy efficiency, you name it. And we couldn't find anything that really met that criteria. And it turns out 2022 is not a great year to tell any CEO, hey, it's a great time to go public. Trust us. We're gonna bring you all this capital, and you can just ride into the sunset, and it's going to be a great great debut. It was very tough. So we ended up, the SPAC vehicle effectively became, in some ways, a BD vehicle for private opportunities, where we were able to successfully deploy capital into 2 opportunities there, late 22 and into 23, before announcing our merger with Sunergy, which ended up meeting our criteria, being a profitable resi solar installation, sales, and finance company. So it was a long route to get to where we were, and it was not prescripted. I think it was one of these squiggly lines where you kind of move forward, go way back, and then ultimately, hopefully, you're just going up and to the right. But there was a lot of trepidation throughout that process.
So 2022, you meet 400 companies, which is sort of of that 400, where would you bucket them now, right? What percentage of them are going to make it, or have already sort of run out of capital or had to do some version of restructuring? What happens here?
Yeah, we met with, we took a shotgun approach. So it was a combination of utilizing our proprietary relationships that we had, but also every bank under the sun, was looking for a fee.
They've got a list, and they're public.
But it was probably the lowest quality of bank pipeline deals that I've seen in my career, lower quality than TMS even. I mean, it was.
It sort of makes sense, right?
We're going to keep going back to the TMS throughout this whole podcast.
I don't want to be known as the TMS guy. Okay, but I think the takeaway here, right, is if you sort of think about it, the guys who are left on the list were the ones who weren't able to get on the boat when you guys sort of started at the tail end of the SPAC mania.
Correct.
The early part of the SPAC mania, that's when the right time was to get on the boat. And
Correct.
Whoever you're seeing on this list couldn't get it done then, right? So by definition, it's going to be almost impossible to get it done.
Most of these companies should fail that we met with, because the reality is VCs tapped out, right? They made their bets. you can't have your fifth bet in the same sector, right? Even though VC is supposed to have zeros, and that's how you get paid, and that's how, that's why your LPs are investing in what you're doing.
Yeah.
There was this way too much supply, as much capital as there was. Most of those companies won't supply, it won't survive, and we've seen that. These companies have come back around saying, "Hey, what are you up to? There's ways to work together." And the reality is their teams are not strong enough, which was a huge theme in energy transition that we saw. I mean, I missed the days of oil and gas management teams. And we had at Bruin and Ursa, we were truly a public ready team. We could have gone out, we could have been institutionally, approachable at really any moment in our life cycle. That doesn't exist in energy transition. Very rarely does it exist in energy transition.
Do you think that's because there's too much focus? Like, what is there an offset argument to that, right? Like, so is it? Like we're used to in oil and gas being institutionally ready because you have to raise so much capital out the gate.
Yeah.
And that is generally from funds that require certain elements of, sort of readiness.
Professional. Yeah, you got to be professional ready.
Do you see something within those teams, though, that is superior? Like, is there just a prowess on the technical side, or is there something where there is a focus of something that is superior, or are you just like, no, generally speaking, like, we're just not seeing quality?
Obviously, there was something to get these companies to where they were, right?
Yeah.
They had a contract with, an S&P 500, Fortune 500 business that they had never had in their entire career, right? Yeah. They were dealing with mom and pops, or they were dealing with, just multiple pitches a day to try to, get customers to just sign up, not just retain, but just sign up, whatever their service was. Energy as a service, some green hydrogen deal, or, some biofuel SAF plant that they're trying to construct. I mean, these were all ideas that they're not that technically innovative, but
yeah.
The market, they were either too early for the market, or when they were starting, they were too late based on when they could have raised capital, because they just tried to ride a wave, and they were too late to the game. Regardless of the reason, the teams were just they're not the same caliber that we're used to from the upstream, midstream traditional energy themes. And I think the ones that have been successful in energy transition, they do have A+ teams, and you're seeing it, and they're able to justify higher valuations because of that. Yeah. Because investors are saying, hey, it's probably rich, but I have 15 other opportunities where teams are just they don't have what we're looking for, and they don't have what's necessary to scale, and they don't have what's necessary to lock in long-term commercial agreements. They don't have the ability to have a true back office, to provide financials on a quarterly basis and have monthly closes that kind of are just what we're used to. So, F it. We'll overpay a little bit for this one, but we're betting on the team to be able to grow into that value, earn into that valuation, and actually deliver, right? And some of them have worked, is what we're seeing in the last few years. Teams are really important.
It's sort of a counterintuitive point, which is you're saying the average management team on the oil and gas side is probably a lot more rock star than the average management team on energy transition. And even then, now that we've consolidated, right? Like, now you're at a point where there's only so many management teams left on the oil and gas side.
It's
you can make
the
argument that the top decile on the oil and gas side versus the top decile on the transition side is almost light years different, right? Like, in terms of,
I mean, definitely, I wouldn't say top decile, but I mean, say, 75th percentile, there's a huge difference. Median, astronomical difference. But top decile, you start to look. Yeah, I think it's equivalent on both sides.
Okay, so you and I have to go start a fund here, 2024, looking at transition-related opportunities. We've had some debates ad nauseum on like risk-reward. I feel like a lot of this stuff has asymmetric, like very limited asymmetric upside and a lot of downside risk. What do you think we go chase where it fits the, what is our tried and true more private equity style return versus, venture return?
Yeah. I think we have a lot of conversations about this one. But what we've seen at the SGen side and the Regen side, which is our private vehicle, there's a ton of companies that I think could benefit from having a control style investor really just mitigate the fundraising process that
Sure.
is effectively a 6-month operation for these founders.
Every year.
And yeah, it's every year because you're always fundraising
It's
when you're in these
50% of your time
businesses.
at least, and probably 80% of your mental energy.
And they're always trying to find, hire a CFO or bring on a head of strategy or someone to help with that. But ultimately, no investor is going to want to talk to them. Every investor is going to want to talk to the CEO. It's going to take a ton of bandwidth, and you ultimately lose, time that could otherwise be spent on your business, hopefully scaling your business, right?
Yeah.
If it's a true growth equity, way past the VC, life cycle. So like, I see a huge opportunity in that of kind of, control-like or controlling larger tickets, true, I'd say private equity in nature, but really partner-minded, right? So
Yeah.
working with these teams and maybe some similar ways to where like the VCs
Yep.
were doing so. But like even then, I mean, how effective was having 10 VCs and some minority round, a Series B or C, where they're going to own 20 or 30% of the business, maybe, with one new board member. But how effective is that capital structure? Like, what advice are you getting? What level of attention are you getting from the 5 to 10 different funds in your group? Each one of them were apparently great partners, right? But
Yeah.
every one of them is in a different state of their own fund life. They all have different incentives from each other. One's trying to exit in this year, one's trying to raise a new fund that year. So I think founders are seeing that, and management teams are seeing that there are synergies with just having one partner. Here's 50 to 100 million bucks. We'll give you some credit for your business today, and we'll grow with you in the form of a commitment, whether it's M&A, right, buy and build, or whether it's greenfield, whatever the strategy may be. And that back end that you get on that capital, I've done the math a few times. It's actually not dissimilar from raising 5 successful venture rounds. You're going to end up owning 20% of your business anyway. So just take a 20% back end and just call it a day.
Look, I appreciate, Nader's trying to make private equity great again. Those sort of energy transition private equity great again, which I appreciate, because you've got some like maybe a lot of people haven't seen you, and if they're not watching like sort of the YouTube or the Spotify, Nader has there's a very tall Persian je ne sais quoi, coming out here trying to make private equity great again. But like the counter here, right, is the barrier to entry to get that PE control check is much higher. For that same reason we talked about, right? Like, you don't want to back the average management team. The average management team on the transition side could go raise a couple $1 million in venture. That's your seed check to go start, sort of getting after it. That's the equivalent of the 2 or 3 year G&A commitment, right? And so there is, by definition, you're going to have some difference there in terms of. Now, if the best have a choice, there's a couple different distinctions here. One is non-control capital, right? Which I think is probably the biggest difference. But I think there's some element to business plans where you're right. Like, I think we've talked about this a little bit, which is, and I hate to say this, is nature-based. Like, if you want to go do a nature-based project today, I almost think the right path of you and I is actually go talk to a handful of really high-quality private equity funds, raise control equity capital across the board. It's a commitment deal on day one, and then go talk to the big 25 public companies about being an off-taker at, sort of a price that generates private equity returns, right? Like that's sort of the math. The same could be true, let's say, in like a geothermal, which is like very similar. And for the life of me, I'm shocked that energy private equity has not yet done. They probably will. But I can't think of very many other categories where that concept of like, here's a small amount of G&A for a 2-year G&A deal. And if we're right, we'll go spend hundreds of millions of dollars generally in the ground with limited downside risk. Or, we'll just part ways, right? That's sort of the binary.
I think there was many more. There's clearly more than just those two sectors, right? I think it's applying either a combination of a platform approach, right, which is what you just described, right? And there are probably limited instances of a platform company, right? I mean, RNG is an obvious one, where you're actually, true greenfield development, right? Hydrogen doesn't seem to be kind of capable to do that right now. We'll
I
see.
don't know,
Maybe
did you see
in a
the
few years,
did you see
but
the announcement about the natural hydrogen deal that Coloma raised like $250 million to
yeah,
go drill
drilling
extended
for
exploratory wells?
yeah for geo hydrogen, I guess we'll call it. Which I know. I mean, Samvita has a good. We talked about this too. I mean, Samvita has their gold hydrogen play, and
By the way, you missed
I don't
Samvita
think it's
Day.
dissimilar.
Where
I know I
you,
missed it. Moji's never gonna forgive me. But I've been there. I was there in spirit. I hope he had the same Persian food cuisine. Did he?
he did, and I took your advice because you said like everyone ate that and then fell asleep or
Yeah.
started getting sleepy. And so since I was moderating the panel, like whatever at shortly after lunch, I was like, dude, I'm not going to eat anything yet. Otherwise, low energy moderator. That's guaranteed to never be invited again.
Yeah,
So
but I don't think you can ever be low energy, Raj. You have a bundle of energy. But anyways, back to what I was saying. I think there are more industries where a platform approach could work.
yeah,
But roll-ups are still interesting. It doesn't have to be in. It could be traditional businesses that have an energy transition growth wedge, right? It could
yeah,
be an EPC business. It could be a waste management business. It could be a maintenance business, right? A company that just provides a service to provide, to make sure that, hey, these renewable fuels are actually renewable fuels, and they
right.
meet spec and they meet regulatory thresholds that then justify the credits that are going there as well. That business might have been doing the exact same thing for diesel and fuel oil, right?
Right.
And low sulfur, high sulfur, bunker fuel, right? They've just repurposed an entire business plan that's been working for multiple decades to low carbon fuels, right?
This
But
is actually, yeah,
that's not a new innovative technology, but it's a business that's investable today that already has some cash, clearly kind of more stable, old school cash flows, we'll call it, but a huge growth wedge.
that's a more fascinating business concept, right? Because in our industry, oil, like if you think OFS, the assumption is like, dude, there's just no margin. Horrible business, cyclic.
Yeah,
No one wants to be in the OFS, business. No one wants to be in the OFS private equity business. Okay.
yeah,
Here, though, there is a
it's
contention to
different.
be made because there's standard growth, because it's less cyclical, let's say, and there's expansion opportunity, which like the private equity fund can actually create real value in, right? Which is like,
Correct.
here's your business today. This is a rightfully or wrongfully, this is a mismanaged gem, right? You've done a good job of building a business. We can pour capital in here, expand the lines of business, and all of a sudden, 1 + 1 = 4, right?
Yep.
And you're seeing more of that. It sounds like.
Yeah, 100%. And you're seeing deals get done at reasonable valuations where there's actually a path to create value for both the investors and the teams,
Yeah.
whatever the strategy may be. And it's a lot of those sectors I just described. They're not, let's go start a green hydrogen devco,
Sure.
right? Where you're depending on 5 credits to get your project off the ground and, a large strategic to take an outsized bet on offtake, right? When
Yeah.
they don't have to, besides the fact that it's green. So
Do you think?
I think there's ways to make money right now, more so than there was a year ago, and people are more they've right-sized their balance sheets, they right-sized their expectations to be able to get these types of deals done.
Are you seeing a lot of these as like legacy family businesses, or call
Yeah,
it boom
totally.
businesses, guys ready to retire?
Yeah,
Much more amenable to doing a deal at a reasonable valuation.
yeah, we're definitely seeing that, and then we've also seen deals that have just a convoluted capital structure. There might have been like 3 or 4 investors over the last 15 years, and no one really provided true growth capital. But the business today has, let's say a waste to fuel new business line where there's an offtake for some concrete manufacturer, or concrete asphalt company that's saying, hey, come inject biocarbon into my concrete. I'll give you a fixed price. I want this much volume. It smells and it looks and it feels like a take or pay, right? And that could justify then that company to actually go and build out whatever that facility is for
Hmm.
that customer, right? And that's growth capital, right? But there's already an existing business that supports that kind of growth wedge, I'd say. And there's probably debt financing that's also available. You can get very creative with opportunities like that, but we're seeing more of those. But those types of opportunities are not necessarily being pitched by banks, right? They're much more bespoke. They're Yeah, you gotta have very creative sourcing, right? Whatever your tactics are, I think that's what you have to depend on.
I mean, we've talked about this. It feels like to try to generate a return in this category, you're kind of playing the game on hard mode. Like there may
Yeah.
be opportunities around, but they're not. It's not like shooting fish in a barrel or something.
No, I think, but again, I think it's easier now than it was. I mean, hard mode was 2022 when like every company's valuations expectations were so high, right? We had one demo plant after a successful pilot. We have 10 plants in the pipeline. We want $1 billion valuation and give us $200 million of growth capital. Like those days are done, right?
Well, 2022 is not that far from the peak, right? And so you're still in this like anchored to this peak valuation. Maybe you come off of it 50%. That's not enough. Like
No.
still not enough, right? Like if you were inflated 10x, you had to come down tremendously. And sort of go through. And now there's sort of last year might have been the sobriety period.
100%. And this year things are getting done, right? The bid-ask spreads. It's similar to what we saw in upstream. Like nothing was getting. Every banker was coming into our office at Bruin between 2018 and 2020 saying it's the year of consolidation. It's going to happen. You guys need to stand up a real business, drill real wells, deliver cash flow, pay back your investors on a yield base, all that jazz that everyone now is saying. Now bankers were singing that tune for a long time. They knew it was inevitable to happen.
It was inevitable.
But it was 4 or 5 years too early. Now it's happening at some rapid pace. Right. But the bid-ask spread ultimately collapsed, right? And now you're probably not seeing that to the degree you're seeing in oil and gas. But there's a huge consolidation play in utility scale solar developers and behind C&I, either front of the meter or behind the meter. Solar developers on the resi solar. I mean, there's so much, and there's probably, been 100 bankruptcies. There's probably gonna be 10,000 more. Unlike oil and gas, these companies are not worth saving. Right? They don't have any real assets.
You just liquidate.
So you liquidate. They're done. You never hear about them again. But there are those sales. The networks that those dealers were penetrating are now up for grabs, right? Because those dealer networks are just falling off a cliff. So there is a lot of opportunity right now to consolidate, and with people that have reasonable valuation expectations where you can actually generate returns. And once the cycle comes back, i.e. when the 10-year treasury maybe drops to whatever 3.5, then you'll start to see but you'll start to see a scenario where like they were really smart. Who got into
about look, you have a bunch of venture-backed businesses, and the case in venture, which is like. There's really not much of a difference between a venture investor generating a 2x or a goose egg, right? Because they're there trying to chase 10x, 20x, 30x plus return.
Yep.
Do you think there's an opportunity to go roll up any sort of climate tech that's venture-backed, the founders long in the tooth, maybe they took some secondary out? I mean, I think there's a bunch of zombie cos out there. Is there a roll-up strategy there that you think venture investors and founders may be amenable to, which is superior than just like, hey, we're just going to shut this thing down, right?
I mean, I think there's probably way too many carbon offset marketplaces, right? There's probably way too many, especially on the nature-based side. There's limited industrial credits, but there's so many nature-based credits. There's so many companies that were using drones to identify, how much carbon this tree sequestered in the Amazon. I forget the names now, but there was probably 5 or 10 companies doing the exact same thing.
There's more platforms servicing the developers than there are developers, right?
Than there are buyers.
And
there are buyers. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not sure consolidation even makes sense necessarily just because the buyer pool for credits is just is disintegrated. So that's one sector. Like methane emissions, I remember that every VC company has an investment in methane emissions, right? Like how, whether it's a drone, whether it's
some monitoring technology,
a sensor you put there, and you're calculating methane emissions, whether it's from a coal plant or from a oil and gas field, etc. But there's too many of those companies out there to justify that many G&A budgets. Mm-hmm. That's probably more amenable to carbon offsets, I'd say today.
Yeah.
What else?
There's a real
on the
service
VC
there.
side?
Yeah.
There's carbon accounting, right?
Yep.
Let me say Watershed get their big deal done but there
That
are,
was
you know,
it was wild to see that. I
yeah.
mean, look, hats off. They've done very well. I don't know the metrics, but when I saw the raise, I was like, whoa, this is big. This is
Yeah, I mean, they're clearly a leader, right? They're a market leader, but there are a lot of companies that tried to do what Persephone and others are doing, and
Yeah,
they
and I
should be
think
the ones who roll
Pantara's
that
done pretty
up.
well. I mean, look, there's only a handful that are sort of like you can list them off, and then
Yeah.
there's a long tail, right? Like for all the ones we know, there's 150 others that are smaller, trying to get after it, same market. And it's just tough.
Yep.
Like,
And then as another sector is long duration storage. I mean, every VC company invested in a, you know, whether it's Form, Group 14, Silo Nanotechnologies, all those kind of, you know, not proven today, but ultimately one or two of them should be proven,
yeah,
like replacement for long duration storage in a very impactful way. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't make sense to have that many of them, right? Like, I can't imagine there's going to be 5 technologies that are all market leaders and all winners.
yeah. Okay.
So there's definitely opportunity there on the VC side. It's just it's not what I'm pursuing personally, right? But there's definitely, you know, Chris Saka's next 3-hour call, he can just do a roll up fund, lower carbon roll up fund.
Okay, so we got to go
really
yeah,
well.
we got to call Chris and talk to him about this roll-up fund. So
Yeah, you got to call Chris.
What are we
bring
doing?
him on.
You know, like you come on the founder side for a moment again. You know, come do God's work. What are we chasing?
So on the founder side,
Well, let me frame it this way: one on the transition side. You know, what would you go chase? And then, you know, we'll cover oil and gas in a second. Then we'll probably call it.
I mean, I'm probably speaking my own book here, but I do think this is a, you know, structural low in residential solar in the U.S., right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it's unclear what business model will prevail. Like, is it the German business model or it's the American business model around how these panels are sold? But there's a lot of pain. But the reality is, I mean, that sector is 5 or 6% penetrated in the U.S.
Yeah.
Right? You know exactly what direction power prices are going. It's up,
Yeah.
to the right. And I just think it's an easy business to get into. That if you have some level of sophistication to be able to understand financing, understand how to scale, understand different geographies and what those geographies offer, right? From an incentive standpoint, from a credit standpoint, from a metering standpoint. I think it's a huge opportunity right now to get in by acquiring 1 or 2 or 3 of these super distressed installers, right? That have, you know, historically maybe 50 million in revenue that you can probably buy them for extremely discounted price, right?
And
so
just restructure the business and try to grow it as quickly as humanly possible.
yeah, I think that's really the name of the game. But I think a lot of these companies historically didn't make money, right? Because they were mismanaged, they were very inefficient. Now, like, power prices have gone up, equipment prices have come down. It's just an easy business for someone to get into. I wouldn't say it's like there's definitely risks with it around.
Yeah.
You know, are you going to be squeezed out? So it's a land grab. You got to go big or you got to go home. But
it's also
there is
a permissionless business relatively in transition, right?
100%. Yeah.
You know, you don't need very many approvals to make this work, which is
No.
probably the biggest list of why we say no on a lot of the other business plans, right? Is, hey, we need permission from these 20 people. We still don't know whether or not we're going to get it. And then, you know, the bingo card comes up with some other reason why the project won't work, which is, again, wholly out of your control. That's not the case here. Right?
I think a business that is harder to get into, that if done right, you need more expertise for this. But it's power procurement for, you know, that's backing, you know, this AI renaissance that we're now in.
So it's like
right?
priority power for AI data centers type.
Sure, yeah. I mean, Priority Power has done a remarkable job, right? But there are many other businesses that you hear about in that sector, right? That are, I don't know how well or not well they're doing, but they're not tapping into, at least I'm not hearing about them tapping into kind of more industrial, you know, industrial warehouse or data centers or EV fleet charging, right?
And that's
like
move,
a lot
right?
of these
25-year PPA probably, maybe worst case 10-year, and extreme pressure for that to be renewable power in some form or fashion. the catalyst is we think power prices are going to go up and to the right. Why not lock that down?
Well, and those landlords and those tenants can pay so much for power. It's like Bitcoin mining on steroids, right? And
there's so much margin in the business. There's so much.
And the penalties for not procuring power are astronomically high, right? So all of a sudden an SMR might make sense, right? Or a bunch of battery packs on site that are not diesel, right? Might make sense, but those are interesting businesses, right? And just think about medium and heavy duty fleets, right? In 5 or 10 years from now, whether it's Europe or the U.S., a lot of these fleet operators are electrifying, and if they're not electrifying, they're going to start at least that process, right? And they're all concerned about charging. They're all concerned about just like replacing tires, right? It's a proven model now how fleet operators replace tires, right? We've partnered, invested with that company, Apuria, that's done that very well. Let's mitigate that entire tire management as a service concept for fleet operators. EV charging is definitely equally a concern. Maybe not today because they don't have a huge electrical fleet yet, but that is a real business. It's a huge power procurement business where you can generate spreads, right? The cost of charging your batteries off peak and then bringing back to FedEx or UPS or whoever. And at that point, those guys have to charge their trucks, right? They've already invested so much CapEx in that entire kind of infrastructure downstream that they have to get those things continuously moving.
Yeah, they're already all in there, right? So
they have to.
What's it take to?
But they don't want to get into that business. Owning and operating an EV fleet charging, not passenger vehicle, but fleet charging it's a very specialized business, similar to power procurement, right? You need to know the grid, you need to know how batteries work, you need to know how to charge, when to charge. There's a huge software component, there's a huge logistical component, but there's a ton of growth. It's sitting right in front of us, right? That could be an interesting platform concept as well, I'd say.
And suited for the private equity.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, for sure.
Right? I mean, the underlying is still real estate in some form or fashion, and then capital you should get your money back on. So
and you have a contract from a very well-known fleet provider or
simply not suited. I don't think that's a venture business, right? That's
more
sort of wheelhouse.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, are we up on time? You're running?
I think so. Yeah, I think we're gonna run.
Let's do this. What are we pumping here? If you're a founder looking for a growth equity check, looking for a great private equity partner to help make their business great, call Nader. What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I think if your business needs scaling, call Nader, I guess. But so LinkedIn, email, just call Raj. Raj is the best way to contact me. You find a way. You find a way.
This is how I get the deal fee, baby. This is
exactly.
This is the move, baby.
There you go.
Well, I'm glad.
No, this is awesome. This has been great.
Awesome, man. All right, take it easy.
All right, man. Have a good one. Cheers. Bye.